From The Undertaker's indestructible aura at WrestleMania to the destruction of Prime Umaga, these are the most dangerous versions of WWE wrestlers, starting with none other than Super Cena. By 2005, John Cena had already become WWE champion. But the following year saw the birth of Super Cena, and WWE would never be the same again. This was a version of John Cena that seemingly couldn't be beat no matter what you threw at him. The man survived multiple opponents, kicked out of everyone's finishing moves, and became the most dominant force on Monday Night Raw. He'd get destroyed for 15 minutes, absorb his opponent's finishers, then make a sudden comeback with the 5 moves of doom, hit the FU, and walk away with the title. Every single time. It didn't matter who stood across from him. Edge, Randy Orton, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, JBL, The Great Khali, or Umaga. Cena beat them all. Edge cashed in Money in the Bank and stole Cena's title at New Year's Revolution 2006, but Cena won it right back 3 weeks later at the Royal Rumble. He defeated Triple H at WrestleMania 22 to prove he belonged at the top. He had an instant classic with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 23 a year later. His feuds with Umaga saw him hand the Samoan Bulldozer his first ever losses in back-to-back matches. Super Cena was winning with such predictability that fans started turning on him despite being the top babyface. But that didn't stop WWE from putting the company on his shoulders. From 2006 to 2010, Cena held the WWE Championship through injury comebacks that should have been impossible. He tore his pectoral muscle in October 2007 and was stripped of the title. Doctors said he'd be out for a year, but Cena came back in 4 months and won the Royal Rumble. But while Cena was dominating Raw with his superhuman resilience, over on SmackDown, the Deadman was building something even more legendary. The Undertaker had been winning at WrestleMania since 1991, but after 2005, the streak became WWE's most sacred accomplishment. Beating The Undertaker at WrestleMania became bigger than any championship, and Taker made sure every match felt like the end of the world. From 2006 to 2013, the streak transformed from a cool stat into the most prestigious thing in all of wrestling. At WrestleMania 22, he faced Mark Henry in a casket match. The next year at WrestleMania 23, he had one of his greatest battles against Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship. At Mania 24, the Deadman added Edge to his collection of victims. But then came the legendary 4-year run with Shawn Michaels and Triple H from Mania 25 to 28. WrestleMania 25 and 26 saw Taker go to war with Mr. WrestleMania himself. Both matches are considered all-time classics, with near falls that had fans believing the streak might actually end. Michaels put his career on the line in their rematch and lost, retiring from wrestling after failing to conquer the Deadman. Then Triple H stepped up for 2 consecutive years. Their Hell in a Cell match at WrestleMania 28 was an absolute war, but even the game couldn't put an end to the streak. CM Punk became the last victim of the streak at WrestleMania 29, putting on another instant classic but failing to conquer the dead. No matter who stood in front of the streak, everyone fell. The streak wasn't just about winning, it was about the aura, the entrance, the near falls that made you believe it could end at any moment. Undertaker turned WrestleMania into his personal graveyard, and the streak claimed 21 souls before Brock Lesnar finally shocked the world at WrestleMania 30. But during those peak years from 2006 to 2013, the streak was untouchable. But speaking of the streak, let's talk about one of Taker's most iconic rivals who dominated the blue brand like nobody else. Batista won the 2005 Royal Rumble, and at WrestleMania 21, he defeated Triple H to win his first World Heavyweight Championship. What followed was one of the most dominant championship reigns in WWE history. Prime Batista looked like a superhero came to life with his iconic entrance and unmatchable power. He held that World Heavyweight Championship for 282 days and ran through everyone on the SmackDown roster. Triple H tried getting his revenge at Backlash and Vengeance, but Batista beat him every time. He became the first person to ever pin Triple H in a Hell in a Cell match. Batista defended against JBL, survived Eddie Guerrero's mind games, and battled everyone from the Great Khali to Mark Henry. But his greatest rivalry came in 2007 against The Undertaker. They had last man standing matches, steel cage matches, Hell in a Cell battles, and beat the hell out of each other for months. Batista wasn't afraid of anyone. He was the only guy on the roster dominant enough to beat both Taker and Cena clean during this time. Prime Batista was a legitimate monster, and everything about him screamed main eventer. But moving from one unstoppable force to another, let's talk about the most polarizing period in Raw's history. In September 2002, Eric Bischoff literally handed Triple H the World Heavyweight Championship on Raw. What followed was 2.5 years of Triple H dominating Monday Night Raw in a way that frustrated fans, buried rising stars, and became known as the infamous Reign of Terror. The game held the World Heavyweight Championship for the majority of 2002 to 2005. He formed Evolution with Ric Flair, Randy Orton, and Batista, and together they controlled Raw like a dictatorship. Rob Van Dam, one of the most over babyfaces in WWE, lost to Triple H at Unforgiven 2002 and never got another real shot at the main event for years. Kane got outnumbered by Evolution. Booker T got buried. Every up-and-coming star got fed to the game and his golden shovel. The matches went the same way every time. Triple H would get help from Evolution, retained by any means necessary, and the babyface would look weak. He would kick off Raw every single week with boring, long promos gloating about his win and burying his opponent. Chris Benoit won the title at WrestleMania 20 in a triple threat. But even during Benoit's reign, Raw was still the Triple H show. The reign of terror finally ended at WrestleMania 21 when Batista destroyed Triple H to win the World Heavyweight Championship. But speaking of Triple H, let's talk about one of his most evil creations from the NXT era. Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano were best friends and one of the most beloved tag teams in NXT history. But then in 2017, Ciampa turned on Gargano and became the most hated man in NXT history. Blackheart Ciampa was pure menace. No entrance music, no Titantron. Just Ciampa walking through the crowd in silence while fans booed him out of the building. He embraced being the most despised man in NXT and turned it into art. The feud between Ciampa and Gargano produced 3 consecutive 5-star classics. Then Ciampa won the NXT Championship and destroyed everyone's favorite wrestlers, held the title hostage, and made fans genuinely hate him in a way that felt real. The feud between Ciampa and Gargano is considered one of the greatest feuds in NXT history, and Ciampa's heel turn created one of wrestling's most hated and most indestructible heels. But speaking of dominant NXT runs, there's one undefeated streak that stands above all others in modern wrestling. Asuka made her NXT debut in October 2015 and didn't lose a single match for over 900 days. This was over 2.5 years of complete dominance. Within just 6 months of her debut, she defeated Bayley to win the NXT Women's Championship, and her reign lasted over 500 days. Mickie James, Billie Kay, Peyton Royce, Nikki Cross, Ruby Riott, Ember Moon. It didn't matter who stepped in front of the Empress, she conquered everyone. The Asuka lock made everyone tap. Nobody kicked out of her strikes. She dominated NXT like nobody else. And when she moved on to the main roster, the streak continued till WrestleMania 34 when Charlotte Flair made her tap. But even in defeat, Asuka had cemented herself as one of the most dominant forces WWE had ever seen. Nobody was ready for Asuka, and she was truly unstoppable. But shifting gears from prime Asuka's dominance, let's talk about one of the most legitimate tough guys in wrestling history. When Samoa Joe debuted in TNA in 2005, he walked in as the Samoan submission machine and immediately started destroying everyone. For 18 months, Joe didn't lose a single match by pinfall or submission, and his undefeated streak became one of the most dominant runs in wrestling history. He won the X Division title, put on classics against names like AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels, and everyone from Styles, Daniels, Jeff Jarrett, Sting, and Scott Steiner faced the wrath of the Destroyer. The Coquina Clutch was terrifying, and Joe moved like someone half his size but hit his opponents like a truck. His streak finally ended in November 2006 when Kurt Angle debuted in TNA and made Joe submit to the ankle lock at Genesis. But that loss didn't hurt Joe, it elevated him. Prime Joe was one of the only wrestlers in the world who could beat Kurt Angle and make it look believable. Joe eventually won the TNA World Heavyweight Championship in 2008, but it was that 2005 to 2007 period where Prime Samoa Joe was genuinely one of the best wrestlers on the planet. He proved you didn't need to be in WWE to be a star, and his work in TNA during this era is still talked about as some of the best wrestling of the 2000s. But moving on from Joe's dominance, let's talk about the time WWE created their own version of an unstoppable monster. Ryback arrived in WWE in 2012 with a singlet, a cool catchphrase, and an appetite for destruction that could never be satisfied. For 6 months, the human wrecking ball went on an undefeated streak that claimed dozens of victims. He squashed local talent, then multiple jobbers at once, then mid-carders, and the crowd started chanting louder every week. The comparisons to Goldberg were immediate and obvious, but Ryback was getting over on his own, and WWE pushed him like a rocket. When John Cena got injured in October 2012, WWE needed a new #1 contender for CM Punk. They threw Ryback straight into the main event at Hell in a Cell, despite him never holding a single championship in WWE. But this is where everything fell apart. Ryback lost to Punk after referee Brad Maddox interfered, ending his undefeated streak. Then he lost again at Survivor Series thanks to The Shield. Then he failed to win the Royal Rumble. He lost to Mark Henry at WrestleMania 29. And WWE had turned Ryback from an unstoppable monster into just another guy who couldn't win when it mattered. But whether you loved him or hated him, you have to admit that Prime Ryback was lightning in a bottle. But before Ryback started destroying jobbers, there was another unstoppable monster with an undefeated streak who almost ended Super Cena. Umaga arrived on Raw as a savage Samoan monster who couldn't be controlled and went on an absolute tear through the entire Raw roster. The Samoan Bulldozer was 350 pounds of pure destruction, and for 9 months, nobody could pin him or make him submit. The Samoan Spike dropped people instantly. His running hip attack in the corner looked like it could decapitate someone. The top rope splash was devastating. Everything he did looked violent, and his facial expressions and primal screams made him genuinely terrifying. By January 2007, Umaga was the #1 contender for John Cena's WWE Championship. At New Year's Revolution, Cena retained with a surprise roll-up pin, ending Umaga's undefeated streak at 9 months. But their feud wasn't over. At Royal Rumble 2007, they had a last man standing match that's considered one of the best in WWE history. Prime Umaga from 2006 to 2007 was one of the most believable monster heels WWE ever created. He was scary, he was dominant, and he made Super Cena actually look vulnerable, something very few wrestlers could do during that era. This was one of my favorite gimmicks from that era. But speaking of gimmicks, check out this video next about the most loved versus most hated WWE gimmicks of all time.